Today is World Refugee Day, and the United Nations says the number of refugees worldwide is at its highest in 18 years at over 45 million people. The Syrian conflict is a major driver behind the increase, as Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
4-year-old Shahad is approaching her 1-year anniversary as a refugee. In September 2012, her home near the Syrian city of Hama was destroyed. The aftermath was captured on mobile phone video. Shahad's father, Yahya, describes what he saw when he arrived at the house.
We were pulling the wounded out from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m. 2 of my children were killed.
Yahya took his 2 surviving daughters and fled to Lebanon. Shahad has now become the face of the United Nations World Refugee Day on June 20th. But this one girl's harrowing story is being repeated across Syria. Antonio Guterres, the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, is currently touring Syria's neighbours and visited Shahad's new home city of Sidon in Lebanon Wednesday.
Lebanon is facing an existential threat and needs and deserves massive support from the international community. It is absolutely essential that the wonderful generosity we witness here in villages like this is met by the whole world.
Fadi Hakura, an analyst at London's Chatham House, says there is resentment that the West isn't doing more.
About 1 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon and over 500,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan are putting enormous strain on the local resources, on the local services, and that's also causing some negative feeling.
Elsewhere, there are many crises that remain relatively ignored, such as the refugees who have fled the violence in Mali, says Dr. Uni Krishnan, head of disaster response at the global charity Plan International.
Plan works in Burkina Faso, where there are thousands of Malian refugees there today. And even when the funding is coming, it is extremely difficult to raise funds for some of the invisible needs like child protection, education for refugee children, and psychosocial care and support.
According to the UN, developing countries like Burkina Faso host 85% of the world's refugees. Dr. Krishnan says the youngest refugees sometimes aren't even counted.
Children who are born in refugee camps often leave. They move on to the next generation, they move on to the generation after that, and we have such instances. So registering the birth and having that identity is absolutely crucial, because that will allow them to access education and more choices in future.
55% of all refugees come from 5 war-ravaged countries: Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq, Syria and Sudan. Back in Lebanon, Yahya still fears for his daughter's future.
She has seen fighter planes, artillery, missiles. There is nothing she has not seen.
In Syria, the artillery and gunfire continue relentlessly. The UN estimates that 3.5 million people will have fled the country by the end of the year. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Well, joining us now to discuss this issue further is Mark Yarnell, an advocate for the Horn of Africa at Refugees International. We'd like to welcome you back to Straight to Africa 54.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
So just to continue from where the package left off about the crisis in Syria, how much has that stretched resources for aid organizations, and then how is it affecting Africa, money that should maybe be helping Africans too?
Well, it's a major challenge, and as you know, we're celebrating, or I guess acknowledging, World Refugee Day today. Mm-hmm. Globally, the numbers of refugees has gone up and is higher than any point since 1994. Mm-hmm. And many of those crises are in Africa, with refugees flowing out of Mali, still out of Somalia, Sudan, Congo. Mm-hmm. And so when there's the massive situation, the major crisis happening in Syria that deserves extremely significant amount of attention and resources, mm-hmm. Inevitably there's limited amount of overall resources, and so it can restrict funds that are available for other places.
Absolutely. Well, I want you to talk a little bit, and maybe you can shed some light for us on the theme for this year's World Refugee Day observation. That's take 1 minute to support a family forced to flee. Is that supposed to maybe incite people to be more sensitive to the plight of refugees? What's behind that theme?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any of us, unless we're in that position where we're forced to flee to save our lives or our families' lives, it's very hard to understand what that experience is like. And so I think it's part of the effort, since so much of the globe is impacted by displacement, to try to help understand what that means, and then maybe think about what we can do to help people. And in addition to the campaign of sort of taking a minute to think about a refugee family, there's also an effort by UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, to encourage people to think of what's one item you might take. You know, nobody takes a while to plan out. If you're gonna flee your country, here's the things I can take with me. It happens in an instant. People are fleeing for their lives. And you think about what is so essential that if you can only take the things on your back, what would you take? And I guess that can sort of bring home the reality to some of us.
Now, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon mentioned how it's important to start maybe also trying to really force peace in the world, end conflicts as a way to reduce the number of refugees. Is that still the driving force behind refugees?
Exactly. The numbers that have come out for the number of displaced for 2012, predominantly it's because of conflict. Conflict, like you mentioned, in Syria, in Mali. And so resolving conflicts will go a tremendous way towards resolving displacement. But in Africa in particular, there's also issues relating to climate. And I think we need to understand the complexity of issues that force people to flee.
Right. What about the food situation where people are forced to flee? Is there a problem or shortage of that? Availability?
Absolutely. One area that's experiencing chronic food insecurity is the Sahel in West Africa. And so when there's a conflict in Mali and people are fleeing Mali, they're arriving into areas that are some of the most food insecure in the world. And so not only is there the need to try to support those that have fled conflict, but there's added strain to those that are already living in a very challenging situation.
Any good news? Any repatriations of reversal maybe of refugee crises?
I mean, there's certain situations where refugees, where conflict stabilizes and people are able to go home. And I think, we need to acknowledge the countries that are hosting so many refugees. So Kenya, for instance, is hosting, over 500,000 refugees. And being willing to do that over the long run really makes a difference in terms of waiting out until some of these protracted crises sort of are mitigated.
And I know I also heard about Burundians, who many of them are going back home. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Mark Yarnell, an advocate with the Refugees International, and he serves as an advocate for the Horn of Africa, and he joined us here today on Africa 54.